I am going to talk a little bit about sex and sexual assault. I'll try to be as clean as possible. Some of this may be a little upsetting, but I think this is all really good information for people to have, both parents and students. So I began this project when I wrote a cover story for New York Magazine about Emma Sulkowicz, who is the woman who carried her mattress around Columbia's campus in 2014. She said she was going to carry that mattress around until the university expelled the boy that she said had attacked her, or until graduation. So the larger book is about the new rules of sex on campus. I felt that somebody needed to go back to college as a relatively unbiased observer. I am not an activist on this issue, but I am also no sort of rape apologist. And I went back as a Gen X mother of two. I kind of specialize in gonzo journalism. I come out of a tradition of Hunter Thompson, of Tom Wolfe, of boots on the ground, find out what's really going on. I'm not one of these bloggers who's just like, click, 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 now I know the answer. I put on a backpack and I went to a bunch of different universities and I interviewed students, and I didn't interview them, you know, outside the campus center for 2 minutes. I hung out with them at their dorms, you know, at parties. I went to parties myself. I took my babysitter's driver's license because I figured if I had my own driver's license and I went to a frat party, the guy at the door was just going to be like, this is the worst fake ID I have ever seen in my life. Give this back to your mother. So, you know, the book at its heart really is about this idea of ethical sex, of sex that is thoughtful and sex that is compassionate, and leaves the partner feeling more self-esteem versus less self-esteem, not making people feel used. We grew up in a country that is really, you know, got a lot of complicated feelings about sex. And part of that is manifesting in college. And it's manifesting among students who don't really know how to act in a way that doesn't feel violating, particularly to women. You know, I will be talking about women primarily as victims tonight and men primarily as perpetrators. I'm obviously well aware that there is a lot of, you know, movement on both sides there. My book is really about the gender norms that we have, the cultural gender norms, and the way that boys are taught, you know, by pop culture, if not in the home, because in the home, you know, we don't teach kids this, but they gather it from other places, that a real man, you know, gets laid at any cost, maybe pushes as hard as he can, you know, wants to be a player in front of his friends. So much of what's going on in social media today, I think nobody can deny, is about posing, right? Pretending that you're a player, pretending that you're a pinup girl. These kinds of sexualized identities that are really very performative. What we really need to do is look at what's behind that in the kids' hearts and minds. So I began, you know, my experience with Emma Sulkowicz. I interviewed her a few months before she started carrying the mattress. We talked about her story, and she told me, I'm going to carry this mattress. Make the private suffering public. It's a big object. You need other people to help you sometimes to carry it, right? 4 people can carry it together, her and 3 other people. That makes the burden really easy to lift. The burden of sexual assault really easy to lift. I'll be returning to Emma. I am aware that there's some problems with Emma's story. I'm aware that not everybody in this audience thinks she's telling the truth. Anyway, so when she told me she was going to carry this mattress, she said, okay, when I go back to school in like a month, we can carry this mattress. And I said, that is the craziest thing I have ever heard. You know, and the journalist in me said, well, that's a pretty good story. I mean, it's pretty interesting. Why don't you give me a call when you do that? I'd like to see that. I had no idea it was going to become this enormous viral sensation and go every place from Vice News to MTV to Al Jazeera to newspapers around the globe. I'm sure lots of you are aware of her story. So what is the problem with sexual assault? The basic problem culturally is that women do not talk about it. They are silent about it. They may be silent because they are secretly ashamed of it. They may feel that they didn't do enough to resist, and they blame themselves, or admitting that something like that happened to them means talking about sex in an open way, and that makes them really uncomfortable. There's so many different reasons why women are silent, often because they're not believed. And the problem is that men don't see it. They don't see that it's happening as much as it is. They don't see that they themselves could be doing it. You know, we hear a lot about privilege these days, right? You know, it's a little bit of a loaded term, but it's kind of true, right? There is a male privilege to say, my pleasure should be prioritized in this hookup, and I'm glad you're here, but really it's all about me, and it's all about my pleasure. And female trauma is something that exists within the female sphere. It's not something that needs to be brought out into the open. I don't really need to see it. So when I began my reporting at Columbia University, I hung out with a bunch of activists, young activists, social justice warriors. These are the ones, right? They had a group called No Red Tape, and that was about red tape, which is bureaucracy. And it was about how Columbia, they believed, was putting a lot of demands on them to try to get justice in their case. Fill out this form, fill out this other form. Oh, you went home for the summer. Well, I'm sorry. If you want to get justice, you got to get on a Skype call with this investigator. I know you have an internship, but we're going to close your case unless you do it. And so it's very clear that, you know, this was a number of years ago now, and I do believe that universities are getting better at dealing with this. I think it's a bit of a false story in the media that universities are not learning how to deal with this. But at this time, it's clear that Columbia, something was a little weird going on here at Columbia. So they put this on the lips of the focal point of Columbia's campus, if anybody's been there. This is the statue of Alma Mater. It's Athena in academic garb. It's 8 feet tall. It's the sculptor who created the Lincoln Memorial, and they silenced her, right? So it's a symbol of how they felt silenced. Later on in my book, I also talk about it as potentially a symbol in the way that universities are silenced. Because of federal privacy regulations, universities are not allowed to comment on individual cases, which is part of why we never hear their comebacks in the media when they're attacked as doing a bad job with this. So there were a lot of other students who brought their own mattresses out, these shiny blue bed bug proof mattresses that are over 6 feet tall for, you know, growing boys that Columbia had bought for their dorms. This is a large rally where all sorts of kids from all sorts of extracurricular groups, including the swing group, brought out mattresses. They put the names of their mattresses on with the red tape. At the end of this rally, these students were very organized and knew a lot, marched off to the president of Columbia's house, his big mansion, and they said, everybody dump your mattresses right here at his front door. But because they were very organized, they stacked all the mattresses very nicely. So this is the big slogan, right? If you are a young, radical, millennial, feminist activist on campus, this is what you want people to know. It's not my fault. Don't tell me don't get raped. Let's talk about don't rape. Let's talk about the male behavior that's leading to this, right? There's been some debate about this. On a rational level, women also need to protect themselves. We can't just talk about what men are doing wrong. And it's become, as we know, in a very politicized era, 2017, a big football here. What do women have to do, and what do men have to do on this issue? But this all started way before, right? It started with Title IX in 1972, which President Nixon signed into law. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So this means if you get federal funds, if you're looking for Mr. Green and you're a university, which is almost all of them, no discrimination on the basis of gender. He signed it into law, Nixon, because he was also trying to sign into law a bill that postponed court orders to integrate schools by busing. But he let this one in as well. I don't think he could have seen what was going to happen. We all know it as what has led to female sports teams having good equipment, right? And having at least supposedly the same amount of money that the boys' sports teams have. It also protects sexual harassment, and it also protects sexual assault. But not until Obama got involved in this in 2011 did it really take root in universities that Title IX, that gender discrimination could be linked to this idea of sexual assault among female and male college students. These surveys have been out there forever. We've known that a lot of this stuff is happening. I'm not going to stand here and say I don't think some of the surveys are overblown, but when you look really carefully at them, if it's not 1 in 5 women sexually assaulted by graduation, we're definitely in the 1 in 10 area, we're 1 in 14 area. I wouldn't go any higher than that. So that is epidemic status. So Obama decided that he wanted to protect students, and he began to embolden his Office for Civil Rights. 2011, this is the same office that deals with the transgender bathrooms, and he said, let's get serious about this. Joe Biden was his partner in this, and they also partnered with some students. I wouldn't call it partnered necessarily. They put out these suggestions and said, universities, get serious about this. We want you to jump through all these hoops. And then they kind of left it at that. But then the students who said that they were survivors, they said, well, we're not going to just leave it at that. You said you were going to revoke all their federal financial assistance if they didn't do the right thing, but we're showing you they're not doing the right thing and you're not doing anything, right? You've initiated a political dance, and we are not okay with that. So these students, this is a woman from Know Your Nine, which was an early and extremely effective student advocacy organization. Students from Yale and Amherst and Tufts, all these students began to talk to each other. Because of the internet, they were able to talk to each other, campus to campus to campus, and say, this is happening to me. And they began to go to the media with their stories. These are 2 women from End Rape on campus. They are the graduates of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. They became extremely effective in this arena. They would reach out, right? We're talking 2013. I read these stories online, right? We've all read these viral stories of somebody who says that they were assaulted at the University of, Arizona. They would read these stories. They would find the contact for that person. Maybe that would have been in a student newspaper, right? Find the contact for that person, get in touch with that person, say to that person, first thing they say, we believe you, right? Second thing, we want to help you. We want to also connect you to somebody in the media. So students began to reach out to journalists, and journalists loved this topic, right? Because nothing sells newspapers like fear about young, hot co-eds, as somebody put it to me. One of them said. Okay, so not only did they get the media game going, they began to put in these complaints to the Office for Civil Rights, right? These are called Title IX complaints. This happened to me on campus, and it was wrong, and the university did me wrong. Here we have 55 schools under a federal investigation for sexual assault. This is from 2014. There are now over 300 schools under this investigation. So when I started to do my project, after Columbia, I thought, well, how am I going to do this book? You know, if I really want it to be a national look. So I decided that I would go back to my own alma mater, which is Wesleyan University, as Lonnie said. It's a very small liberal arts college that's been nicknamed PCU in Connecticut. I am not as liberal as a lot of the students who are there, but, you know, those are all my friends and my homies. And I thought, like, I'll go back and see what's going on here. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the book. So when I went back, youth culture's 20-year nostalgia cycle was coming back around. The school was awash in dark Martin boots, velvet chokers, Converse high tops, plaid flannel shirts, and shoulder-slung mini backpacks. Sonic youth patches were no longer sewn to the backpack's front pockets. Instead, since plastic water bottles are banned on campus now, these pockets often dangle a carabinered steel canteen. Not only do these students look the same, they also talk urgently about many of the same issues, in particular sexual assault. As many of you know, of course, this was an issue, right, in the last PC era, late 80s, early 90s. Economic inequality, destabilization in the Middle East, access to guns. Nope, students don't talk about that much here. Racism, sexism, gay rights, trans rights, and sexual assault, these topics are constant. But the way that the students talk about it is entirely different than the 1990s. Debates about what is consensual in sex and what is not, what type of sex is ethical and what is immoral, are essential to life here today. One student told me, there's a difference between illegal and unethical. Life is not about doing whatever you can do. It's about not doing what's traumatic to another person. So this is a rally, much like the one I went to at Columbia. These kind of erupted, right, across the country in 2015. Then I decided to pick a school that was, you know, the counterpoint to Wesleyan. I thought because I was in New York that I would go to Syracuse, which was very close to New York City. I then realized it was 5 hours away and very hard to get to and extremely cold. So, you know, I could have gone to Ole Miss or I could have gone to the University of Alabama, and I cursed myself when I was sitting there and it was like, you know, -3 degrees. But I did spend a good amount of time at Syracuse with sorority sisters at Syracuse. And I talked to them about this same idea. What is consent? What's sex? Consensual sex? What is sexual assault? So one of the women I interviewed, her name, her pseudonym is Blackout Blonde. That's the name that she writes under also. She's a really talented writer. So I'm going to read a little bit about her. Hookups on Planet College are fun, Blackout Blonde tells me. After all, if they weren't, why would so many people have them? At a time when every type of music has been discovered and every pierced and tattooed subculture brought into the commercial fold, semi-anonymous or mostly anonymous sex with someone you barely know is a wild experience, one of the few forms of rebellion left for youth in America. At least on the surface, Blackout Blonde is pro-girl, admonishing frat brothers for being cheap and serving warm Keystone beer at parties because they know girls will dry hump each other on the speaker system no matter how little they spend on liquor. But as we talk, she does ultimately recount some experiences that belie her pro-hookup line. One time, she tells me, she was making out with a frat brother in an alleyway behind a party, and he started to squeeze and manhandle her too aggressively. She took off a heel with one hand and hit him in the head with it, then ran down the stairs. As she descended, she called a friend on her cell phone and yelled into the receiver, "I'm like Cinderella escaping the prince!" Another night had a murkier, more troubling denouement. She was hanging out with a fifth-year senior, a hockey player, at his house. But all she can remember is doing keg stands to a Taylor Swift song. She tells me, I was a sophomore and he was so much older, so that made me really like him and think he was really cool, but I don't know what happened that night. In the morning, she woke up in bed with him wearing his boxers. She couldn't find her clothes at first, and then she looked between the mattress and the wall and saw her outfit sandwiched there. That was a weird place for her clothes to be, unless the two of them had hooked up, she thought. clothes don't usually get smashed between a mattress and a wall unless someone pushes them hard off the bed during sex. The guy kept saying, don't worry, I was too drunk last night to screw Blake Lively, okay? Acting all, don't flatter yourself. Well, A, I appreciate the comparison to Blake Lively, but B, I think he at least tried. I ask if she thinks of herself as a rape survivor. No way, she says. As far as I'm concerned, there's only one person to blame in that situation, and his name is Jose Cuervo. So we have some very different perspectives, right, on this night. I also went to Vanderbilt. Some of you probably know that Vanderbilt had a pretty major scandal among some football players where these 4 football players assaulted an unconscious woman in a dorm one night. I use this example to talk about what I believe is behind a lot of this, which is not only these kind of toxic gender norms, blah, 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 but also the actual structure of the campus. First of all, we all know football, it's got a problem. It's really got a problem, particularly with gang rape. And actually, athletes are not overrepresented as rapists on campus, but they are overrepresented as gang rapists. It's also not all athletes. It's football teams and basketball teams, according to the studies that I've seen. So in this case, we had some boys. The white boy here didn't know the 3 black ones. He was a new recruit. He had just arrived. He was their wide receiver. And the 4 of them, not knowing each other, happened to assault this woman. How did this happen? The white football player was on a date with a pep rally girl. They had gone back to her apartment. She was too drunk. He was too drunk. They couldn't get the door open. She lost one of her shoes on the ground outside. They got into her car, decided to drive to his dorm. By the time they got to his dorm, she was passed out. These guys, these 3 guys, happened to be going back to the dorm. They were just getting Mexican food, takeout. They happened to be going back to the dorm. And the white guy said, hey, look at this. I got this passed out girl here. Isn't this funny? Isn't this hilarious? So they took her upstairs. They hefted her upstairs, took her up in the elevator. They were all laughing, joking around. Once they got off the elevator, she fell on the ground. Her skirt went up. They started taking pictures of it, right? Because they all have their cell phones. And they began to carry her to one of the dorm rooms, like the Steubenville carry, right? Everybody knows that, like a hunter carrying fresh game. How do we know all this? It was all captured on surveillance. In addition to that, they all took pictures of the assault themselves. This is a very strange and new front in this issue, which is sexual assault is really hard to prove, right? There's very few cases where there's a lot of physical evidence, particularly if we're talking about situations where physical force isn't even used, right? Like, not everybody agrees in this room that some sort of sex act without physical force should be considered sexual assault, but it is. But yet now, more and more, the cases are being captured on surveillance within dorms, on people's cell phone cameras. And we're kind of learning the truth. Because the fact is, without these cameras and without those pictures, this girl didn't know it happened. When the cops first took her to the station house to tell her about it, she said there was no way that happened to her. She had absolutely no idea. So rape is rape. This is a picture from Stanford's graduation ceremony after, I believe it was after the Brock Turner case at Stanford. And here's something I get into my book too. As I said, I'm not an activist on this issue. Activists want this to be the case. They want to say that sexual assault and rape may be actually the same thing. Rape is penetration, sexual assault is not. A butt grab in a public place, a grab and kiss at a frat party, to my mind, is not the same as a rape. But these kinds of ideas are flying around the internet, right? What to expect when you're sexually assaulted on campus. Somebody has stamped raped. We want to use that powerful language, right? Let's call it something that gets attention, and let's finally change the inequality that exists here. So in addition to inequality in the bedroom, a lot of these young activists were talking about speech, right? I don't think anybody thinks these are great banners. Rowdy and fun, hope your baby girl has a good time. This is a frat house, right, during orientation. Freshman daughter drop off. Go ahead and drop off mom too. So does this create a hostile environment for students on campus? Yeah, maybe it does, right? Should we call it sexual assault? Well, we might be getting into like a little strange territory there. Some of these newer surveys, they start to ask about students. Have you heard a sexual joke? Have you heard a sexual joke on campus? We might want to call you a victim of that, right? I do not obviously agree with that, but I do think that way too much sexual assault is happening, and this movement is really good. I just think we need to focus on what we're actually talking about. So a lot of this discussion was going on, right? What is sexual assault? What's the gradation of consent? What should we really call it? How much of it is happening? But everybody's kind of riding along fine, and then something happened. And that's UVA's story about, Rolling Stone's story about UVA, right? Which was depicting a very violent gang rape and was ultimately, as many of you know, revealed to be untrue. So suddenly we have a new kind of philosophy coming in here. It's not about gradations of consent. It's not about whether physical force ipso facto creates a situation of rape. It's about who's telling the truth and who's lying. And a lot of the women that I talked to at Wesleyan and other places liked to mention that they would maybe call themselves the witches, right? Which is what young women have done kind of for many years. You have a bunch of rebellious young women who don't want to hew to the social norms. They might, take that on. And, these girls, they not only had this sorcery, right, to upend what was going on, but they were also unfairly victimized. But now we have a new group of students who want to call themselves this too. So one of them says about being an accused boy on campus. This is a witch hunt, no different than the Salem witch trials or McCarthyism. A fear has been sold to the country that every man is a potential rapist. This is now an American truth, just the way the communists infiltrating and taking over our country was a truth of McCarthyism. For our American boys today, it's guilty before innocent. So a lot of parents of accused boys began to organize. This is a parent from the university, from Fargo, North Dakota. Her son was accused at the University of North Dakota. His case was ultimately overturned and he was exonerated. She began to organize also with the mom of this student from Auburn University in Alabama, one of the few students who's come out with his real name and said, this really happened to me. And they began to gather a lot of allies, not only conservative and libertarian attorneys, but people who were concerned about due process and felt that boys were being unfairly railroaded, and also felt that women might not be telling the truth. So as time went on, this became, greater and greater of an issue. Who's going to win up between these two sides? As we all know, this game was upended when we ended up with a conservative administration instead of the first woman president, right? So it was fairly clear. If Hillary Clinton was going to be president, we were not going to be talking about sexual assault in this way. She was going to continue to really embolden that Office for Civil Rights, right? Let's keep those transgender bathrooms. Let's keep all these rules about sexual assault on campus. Let's start getting into speech. Let's start getting into more and more regulations, because we want to change the social norms here. We want to make sure that women feel as dignified on campus as they feel in the workplace, right? That's the larger trend. But we have a different administration. In this administration, of course, Betsy DeVos is the education secretary, and she, some of you probably saw last week, made a big speech about how she plans to undo a lot of Obama's protections and cut off the campus courts at their knees, and I believe potentially try to roll back some of the advances on the definition of sexual assault, right? Because Donald Trump, if everybody agreed he was a sexual assaulter, he probably wouldn't actually be president, right? A lot of people think that that was groping, what he did, or was accused of doing, right? What he boasted about doing. So she's chosen for her head of Office for Civil Rights, Candace Jackson. Candace Jackson here is holding a book called Their Lives, which is her book about the accusers of Bill Clinton. You may recall the debate between Hillary and Trump. There was a press conference before that debate, right? And she's kind of like a conservative Gloria Allred. So she came with those women. Afterwards, she sat in the front row during the debate with those women. So what happened to Emma Silkowitz? Okay, so she did take her mattress to graduation, right? Even though there was an email that came out from Columbia's administration a few days before, and they said, please do not bring any large objects that may cause some concerns and discomfort to other people. Do not bring those, but she did bring it. And the same day as the graduation, some group of anonymous bandits wheat pasted all of these posters around campus. And that is the picture from the New York Magazine article, right? But it obviously has a very different caption on it. So jury's out on Emma, right? I mean, not everybody agrees. Some very damning text messages have come out. Personally, I do believe her, but I do also believe that that is a choice, in some ways a political choice. I am not going to stand here and say that everybody needs to agree with me on that. So what's going on now? What's going on the campuses now? There is still this movement, and it really does still exist among the little brothers and sisters of the students who were in college just a couple years ago. And I believe this cycle has yet to run out. As we all know, campuses are enormously radical right now. We're probably looking at another 5 years, right, of something like this. But the conversation is changing, because instead of just being about sexual assault, rape, these powerful words, and getting in your face and carrying the mattresses, now we're getting to a more mature moment where the discussion is about fixing the problem. So bystander education, that is a big, big deal on campuses today. The idea that students can stop sexual assault from happening. If they see it happening, they should step in. If they see a guy taking home a very drunk girl, they should step in. Not all of this has actually been proven to work. You know what's been proven to work? Self-defense. Self-defense for girls. That is politically incorrect to say right now, because the men are bearing the burden. But I believe that if we really want to get through this, what we need to do is tell our daughters, you're in college now, maybe you can drink in moderation. Drinking to the point of excess where you don't know what you're doing, that is not safe. In addition to that, you should have a few self-defense tricks just in your pocket. You should just know a few of them. What's the big deal? Self-defense is having a major problem. There has never been more money for bringing these kinds of programs onto campus to help kids with the problem. There's hardly any self-defense. So right now we're in an incredibly interesting moment, right? So this is a Washington Post poll of 1,000 college students. Do you think if a person does blank, this establishes consent for more sexual activity? So this is what these college students believe. Nods in agreement, half of them say yes. Takes off their own clothes, half of them say yes. Gets a condom, only 40% of people say that establishes consent, current college students, okay? For older people, this is kind of amazing, right? Because once the condom's out, I mean, that was the permission question, right? That was not even the protection question. That was also like, all right, it's on. Engages in foreplay such as kissing and touching. Only 22% of these college students say if you do that, you need to go all the way. And here's the most interesting one. Does not say no. Only 18% say no means no. The rest of them say what colleges are teaching students today, which is yes means yes. We must get ongoing, verbal, or some sort of moan or groan that can definitely be taken as a yes to have sexual activity. Why is that? Why is it that they're so into this idea of yes means yes, right? I believe it's particularly because they're trying to fix the problem with alcohol, because you do have some like passed out people, right? And you want to be able to say, well, they didn't have to give the no, right? I mean, because that is kind of a weird standard to have. If somebody's passed out, they can't say no. But I also believe that it has a lot to do with something that a woman told me also at Syracuse University. And she explained to me how she felt about saying yes and no. She said, I've never felt scared with a guy. I've definitely felt pressured. My problem has always been that I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know when I wanted to say no. And I didn't know how to. And I felt bad saying no. I felt it would be rude, which is so stupid. I guess I should say that it wasn't even that I wanted to say no. It's just that I didn't want to say yes. It's not like I was totally opposed. I was just thinking, well, I don't want him to think I'm not interested at all in this hookup, but I'm not in the mood. Let's just get it over with, because I'd rather be watching TV. So for all of us old married people in the room, I think we all know that feeling, but I also think that we can agree that a 19-year-old in 2017 shouldn't be feeling that about sex. We can really come to a better understanding in this country of what consent is. Consent is a really complicated word. It's a big zeitgeist word, and it's one that everybody has a different meaning of. But on college campuses today, this is what they're talking about. What is consent? What's moral? What's okay to do? What's not okay to do? And trying to sort this out for a new generation. So, thank you.